Hi, everyone. Welcome to the March 22nd episode of the Tom's Hardware Podcast. We are starting at 2:30 p.m. Eastern today. So for those of you in the UK, it's still an hour earlier than usual. Sorry about that. We'll catch up. We'll catch up and be on the normal 7:30, 2:30 time next week. As always, I'm Tom's Hardware Editor-in-Chief, Avram Pilch, and I'm joined by Associate Editor Les Pounder, Raspberry Pi expert Ash Hill, and today's very special guest, Neil Thomas of RMCretro.
Hello, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. You not only do you have something going on with a Raspberry Pi barcode scanner, but you have an incredible retro cave there. Can you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and RMCretro?
Sure, absolutely. My name's Neil. I am the owner of the cave here. It's about the fourth or fifth iteration of the cave, which started way back in 2017. I started making YouTube videos. And over time, it grew and grew until I started doing this full time, making videos about repairing old retro tech. And we've hit a huge milestone just 2 days ago on Sunday, where we had our first public day with paying visitors coming in to enjoy the cave and to see all the computers that we've repaired over the years on the channel and to enjoy them and to meet each other. So this is now a public exhibition space as well as a YouTube channel, which I'm very excited about.
That's amazing. So what do you have there in the cave and how can people come visit it?
You can visit by going to rmcretro.com and clicking visit the cave. And what don't we have? We've got PCs of every generation. We've got rare and unusual things. Just behind me, we have a Sharp X68000, which was unheard of in this country back in the day, but is a real gaming powerhouse. We've got all the UK classics like the Sinclair ZX Spectrum and the Amstrad CPCs, and some of those great ones from your side of the pond, the Commodore 64 and the Atari 800 and things like that. So anything and everything covering up to around about the PlayStation 2 generation at the moment. That's around about where we draw the line. But the lines are getting blurred now as to what is and isn't retro. I think we might need to go the next generation on again soon.
Ah, neat. That is awesome. So how does so with all that stuff, how do you decide what to make videos on and what is popular?
I'll be honest with you, it's very disorganized. I may be a full-time YouTuber, but I'm not necessarily a professional one. It's usually what I've got in the queue of things which have very kindly been donated. I've got a whole rack of things that people have sent in, rare and unusual, usually broken, that need repairing. And it's really just what takes my fancy week on week. What do I want to work on? And it's kind of nice that I've got the freedom to be able to do that. I am under pressure, of course, to keep videos coming to feed the YouTube algorithm and keep the momentum going on that side. But with regards to what content that I want to cover, it's entirely up to me, which is really nice.
As far as vintage hardware goes, is there anything that you've had your eye out for that you haven't had the chance to tinker with yet?
Yes. One I've been trying to get hold of for a very long time is something called a Sam Coupe, which was a late comer to the 8-bit micro market. It can basically play ZX Spectrum games and then some. And it wasn't commercially very successful, so there weren't a huge amount out there for collectors. But I have finally managed to get hold of one. I just haven't had the time to start making a video on one, and that's very high up my list. So looking forward to that one.
That's cool.
Great. So I understand you recently used a Raspberry Pi to create a barcode system. How does that work?
Yeah, so this is part and parcel of an area of the cave just to my right, which is a room that is a reproduction retro computer shop. So think of any video game store that you went in the late 80s to early to mid 90s. Picture that in your head, and we've basically recreated it with the brown and beige slat walls and all of the big box games, as well as the cassette games, all hung up on their pegs. It's a really nostalgic room to walk into. And we've got a kiosk in there, just like a lot of old video game shops. You could walk up to a kiosk and play the latest games. And once we got that working, it kind of struck me that it's a bit clunky for people to go in there and you're fully immersed. It's like you've stepped back in time. But I don't like anything that breaks the immersion when you're retro gaming. So if you have to pop up a menu and see a modern operating system, or just go through menus to change the game, it breaks that immersion and you step out of it. So I thought, why don't we turn the entire shop into the front end? Instead of going through menus, you pick up a game, you zap it with a barcode scanner, which is entirely in keeping with an old school shop, the zap and the beep of a barcode scanner. And then as if by magic, the game appears on the kiosk and you can play it. And that's what we managed to do. So you can now just pick up any game, nearly any game. There's a red sticker on the games, on the back of the games that you can do it with, just to identify them. And you just give it a zap and then you can play games. So the entire shop is now the front end.
That is cool. I love that idea. It's that tangible thing. We think with emulation and actual collecting video games, we think that the two different things, but now we sort of merge the two together. You have this product you can pick up and you can scan it and you can play the game that you want to play. It's awesome.
Yeah, I think there's a real link between effort and reward. Back in the day, you would have a limited number of games that you had access to. Mm-hmm. The effort might be riding your BMX into town with a pocket full of pocket money, and you could only buy what you could afford. And if you made a bad choice and took that game home and it was a stinker, you would still play it to death because that was the game you had. And we're in a situation now where you might load up an emulator and suddenly have access to over 10,000 games. And there's no effort in picking the game, playing it, and you might get bored of that game in 10 or 15 seconds and switch to the next game. Yeah. So I think by just introducing a tiny, tiny bit of effort, which is walking up to a shelf, picking a physical game up and scanning it, it then makes you play it for a little bit longer. I know it's only a tiny amount of effort, but psychologically, I think that does make a difference, and it adds to the enjoyment of the game, I think.
Definitely.
So for people who haven't had a chance to take a look at it yet, what emulators or different types of consoles does it support, so to speak?
Well, this is where the lines are blurred between Raspberry Pi and MISTer. So the Raspberry Pi handles the barcode scanning side of things, and then it talks to the MISTer over SSH. The software that we do this with is called Barcode Rattler, which was written by a friend of the cave, Chrissy, and he's put the code up on GitHub for anyone that wants to play with it. And what it does is it speaks to the MISTer, which is also running Linux. It calls something called MBC, which is MISTer Batch Control, which can launch a ROM from the command line on the MISTer side of things. So all the Pi is effectively doing is it's scanning the barcode. The barcode scanner is set up to emulate a keyboard. It's just taking the string and squirting it into the Pi as if you typed it in on a keyboard. It then looks up that number against a CSV file where it says, does that number exist? Yes. And in the next column, here's the path to the ROM, sends that over SSH to the MISTer, and it fires up. And so at the moment, we are using what's called a MISTer Multisystem, which is this. This is a console of our own making. I made this in collaboration with an electronics firm that is on the floor below me in the mill. And what this does is it takes the traditional MISTer stack and consoleizes it into a more familiar console form factor. And to take the whole Raspberry Pi thing to a next level, instead of having a Pi sat next to it, we've made this, and this has never been seen before. This is a cartridge that slots into the front of our console, and on it we have a Pi Zero. Oh. So instead of having a Pi next to it, the cartridge, which has a nice case on it, slots into the add-on slot, and then you've got a MISTer and a Pi in a unholy union, ready to work together. And you could use that for the barcode scanner. You could use it as the MT32 Pi to emulate the old MT32 or whatever else you want to do with it. So that's the next step. It's still a prototype, but that's what will happen next in the kiosk. Yeah.
But do you have to blow on the cartridge to get it to work?
I reckon we could make it so that you do have to do that. Yeah, we'll make it just bad enough that you have to do that.
You could use an air quality detect sensor or something for that, right? Maybe you could detect when someone's blowing on it for it.
I was thinking of the old DS trick. So the Nintendo DS had a microphone, and for one of the Zelda games, you could blow to blow flames out. So it's just like a tiny microphone. You can blow on that and have it register that you blow on the cartridge, and that will play randomly.
Yeah, that is really awesome. So I just wanted to ask you, because just my personal interest, I was looking through your list of all the things you've done videos on, and my most wanted console, I'm not sure if you have. Do you have a Coleco Atom?
I think it was called something different over here, wasn't it? The Atom, or was it?
Oh,
Excuse me, frog in my throat there. No, I don't have a Coleco Atom. It was not commercially a very successful one, was it? The Atom. I'm pretty sure that was one of the flops. Yeah.
No, it wasn't. It was like, I think it was supposed to be some type of amalgamation of a ColecoVision and a computer.
That's right. And there was an add-on for the ColecoVision to kind of convert it into an Atom that also failed. Yeah. So I've got a ColecoVision. I don't have an Atom. That's the kind of weird and unusual and interesting thing that people do love to see. So I'd like to get one day.
Yeah, that is obviously, there's so much cool stuff that you guys have there. It's just amazing. Les, I know you had another question.
Yeah, I mean, I've got two questions now. Actually, I want to know what the arcade machine is over your right shoulder, Neil. Is that
this one here?
No, the other right. Yeah.
There's only one arcade machine behind me. It can only be that.
No, it's one on the table. Or it looks like it's on a table from this distance.
The mini one.
The mini one, yeah.
I built that. That's a mini Gauntlet cabinet.
Nice.
And that is a future Pi project, because I built that way back in must have been 2012 originally, and the Pi back then, I don't think Retro Pi was about, or the Pi wasn't really that powerful enough to run what I wanted to run on it. It wasn't until we got to the Pi 2 or 3, and it's got a full-on mini ITX PC crammed in there, which it gets hot. It's got a 3.5-inch hard drive in there. It's just overkill. So I want to convert that to have a Pi in it at some point. Yeah.
Very cool. So my real question now then is, I want to know more about the MISTer that you've got. What machines can it emulate? I mean, what breadth of machines can it work with?
Well, so the MISTer's based on an FPGA chip that's in there, and the developers write cores to configure that FPGA chip to mimic old hardware. And it pretty much goes all the way through the 8 bits and the 16 bits. And the latest core that is just about to go to version 1, it's nearly matured to that stage, is the PlayStation. So that's about as far as we can get with that size of FPGA chip. So PlayStation, there's a Saturn in development. So around about there. If you wanted to go further, you'd need bigger FPGA chips, and but pretty much anything you can think of from the 8 and 16-bit eras is covered. Yeah.
Nice one.
Ash, I know you had something you wanted to ask.
Yeah, it did. And Les kind of touched on it. Well, sort of got that answered. I wanted to know, what other Pi projects have you worked on in the realm of retro gaming, and if you had any future ones? So beyond that Gauntlet arcade, do you have anything else in the board?
Yeah, I mean, one of the earliest ones I worked on the channel was, I've got it in front of me here, was cramming a Raspberry Pi into a Game Gear. I did a really terrible paint job on it, so do excuse me. And this was the very early days of the channel, and it's janky. It's janky as hell. You'll see I used expanding foam and breadboards, and it worked pretty nicely. But that's the beauty of the Pi. It's okay to do janky things. It's okay to explore things and figure things out and break things, because just in front of me, I've got 3 Raspberry Pis, and I've got more dotted around. They're just coming out of every box that I've got here, Pis. So it's great to just explore and experiment. And this isn't great. It feels a bit janky, but it taught me a lot of things. What else? The other thing I've done in the past is I'm great friends with a chap called Ravi, who's one of the presenters on another podcast called The Retro Hour. And he likes to DJ with Amiga computers, Amiga 600 computers, using a bit of software called PT1210. So it lets you play all of those old, what are called mod files from on the Amiga using its native sound chip. And he'll put two Amigas together and do DJ sets with them. But that's not particularly cheap to buy a couple of Amigas and a mixer and set that all up. So I set up a couple of Pis. These are Pi 3s, just side by side, much smaller and much more portable than an Amiga. And I got this tiny, tiny pocket mixing desk. So this is my tiny DJ setup for DJing with retro tunes.
Wow.
Oh, that's so cool.
That's a lot of fun. So I had a lot of fun with that. I don't know. I did have great ideas at one point to make kind of a head-to-head cocktail arcade cabinet. So you would sit down and the Pi, it would just be one Pi running Retro Pi that would duplicate the HDMI output. So you had two screens. I've still got them here in front of me. I've got all the parts for this project. So the two players would sit opposite with the screen duplicated and kind of have a battle in a cocktail cabinet style arcade. That's something I want to work on at some point. But I haven't made any progress on that yet, other than getting hold of the parts. Yeah, so there's always something Pi-ish going on.
How many Raspberry Pis would you say you have?
Probably about 7.
Only 7.
Only 7. Yeah, but
Yeah.
I've got the 3 Pi Zeros on their way in the post. So we'll say around 10.
At least 10.
Not too bad. So Neil, I want to ask you a question about the future of retro, if that's not some sort of weird sentence structure. So in 30 years' time, the Raspberry Pi is going to be, 40 years old. Are we going to look back at the Raspberry Pi with such love and affection as we do the retro machines from the 80s?
I think we will. I think we will, especially from everyone who's putting so much effort into projects with the Raspberry Pi. Yeah, I mean, the first thing I thought of when the Pi came out in, when was it? 2012, was it?
Yeah.
2012. This box here actually is the first Pi I bought in that old school box from RS.
Yeah. That's where mine came from, yeah.
I thought I was one of the first to buy it, but I've since learned that the very first, I think they got a free T-shirt or something like that, and I never got a T-shirt. So I was close, but not the very first. And the first thing I thought about when the Pi came out was the BBC Micro, that classic British computer that so many of us learned and had our first computing experience on in the 80s. And I think for a lot of people, the Pi will be exactly that. It will be the first computer that they tinkered with, because when it came out, we were going into the era of tablets and computers where the operating system protected the user so much, they never had to get under the hood.
Yeah.
So I think people will look back fondly on the Raspberry Pi. Whether they'll want to get an old Pi to do something retro, it depends on the current state of the current Pi at that time. How backwards compatible is it? I don't know. But people get nostalgic about weirder things. So I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. I can agree with that.
It's the first, not I won't say first machine for a lot of people, but for a lot of kids who are learning in school, as far as robotics and stuff goes, it's going to be the first machine they play around with Python and tinker and hook a servo up to and really build something from scratch with.
Yeah, and just get that really valuable feedback of them, no matter how simple the program is, getting that feedback that they've done something, they've created something, and they've taken control of the machine. I think that's as soon as they take that first step, it can be very addictive. Yeah.
They become a developer.
They become a developer. Exactly. Yeah.
So a viewer named John says, I was really interested in the project which uses a Pi to replace the Amiga CPU. Are you aware of any similar projects being worked on?
Yeah. So the, what was that called now? PiStorm. Yes, yeah, I've had the pleasure of using that, and it's incredible. So you take out the 68,000 CPU from the Amiga, you put on a Raspberry Pi with the adapter board for that socket, and it takes over the CPU, but not only that, it adds a virtual hard drive controller and a bunch of extra RAM, and it just gives you your dream Amiga in the original case, and the custom chips still work alongside it. So it's a brilliant upgrade for a very low cost, and it continues to be developed. I'm not aware of any others that use the Pi. There's one called the Buffy, which is a custom-made setup. I think that's FPGA based, but I'm not aware of any that use the Pi. No, but the Pi Storm is brilliant.
Yeah, there's a new Pi Storm. I've seen tweets here and there about a Compute Module 4 version being worked on.
Oh, nice.
Which is a lot smaller than a full Pi 4.
Right, so that will help it to fit inside things like the CDTV then, I imagine, which has got quite low clearance. So that would be great to see. Yeah.
I always wanted a CDTV as a kid. I don't know why. I had a Amiga 500, but I just wanted one.
This is the weird thing about retro. It's like the Atom, it's not, excuse me, but it's not a particularly good computer. And the CDTV is not a particularly good computer. And the Amstrad GX 4000 and all of these weird things that failed. Why do we want them? Suddenly we all want them. I don't know. I can't explain it.
I literally this week just bought a Commodore 16 just because I wanted one because I had one as a kid.
What are you going to do with it?
Well, I don't know. So I've got a Commodore 64 already, and I like to mess around with that and play with the user port. The Commodore 16 sort of doesn't do anything of interest. It's just because it was the first machine that I had, and I want to try and get a bit of that back.
It's just nostalgia. It's never a good idea to ask the question why in retro.
Yeah, no,
it's always why not.
I mean, that's true.
42 quid, so that was good.
That's true of a lot of Raspberry Pi things that we do as well, right? Like, why would you? People have asked me, why would you do this thing when you could probably do it some other way? Oh, because we can.
Yeah, why not? Why not?
You shouldn't have. You can't.
Speaking of because we can, Les, you have something you wanted to show, which shows the latest example of being able to do something on a Pico just because you can.
Yeah, there's no real reason why we should be able to do this. It's in the realms of absurdity, really. So, 1990s, the classic first-person shooter of the era was Doom. And Doom has been put on everything. We were discussing before the show. It's been on oscilloscopes. It's been on an ESP32 or handheld games console. It's been on a pregnancy test as well. It's now on a Pico. So I've got a Raspberry Pi Pico of sorts. It's a Pimoroni Pico LiPo. I've got a Pico demo board which connects to VGA and through a myriad of cables to HDMI as well to capture this. And we can play Doom on a Raspberry Pi Pico. So this is just an RP2040 with 264 kilobytes of RAM, and I've got 8 megabytes of storage space. And I'm going to boot it up now. This is why it's at the bars. I turn it on now. You won't hear any audio. I'd say that's intentional, but it's not. I just couldn't get it working. That's my setup with OBS. But this is running on the Pico. If I press the power button, it all goes off. If I press, I've got a keyboard, a wireless keyboard, and I'll switch to me so you can see me. Wireless keyboard. I can play Doom badly. I can go around and I can shoot, I can rip and tear and all that stuff on an RP2040, so Raspberry Pi Pico. So this works with the standard Raspberry Pi Pico, $4. You don't need to have this elaborate setup. The Pico demo, it just makes it a hell of a lot easier. Just plug the board in and away you go. All you need really is a Pico, some wires, VGA connection, and away you go. It's really simple to do. And the guy who did it was Graham, who's been on the show once before, talking about retro games machines last year when the Pico just come out. So here is a link. You can download from there a full release version. You don't need to do any configuration or any building in C or anything like that. Get the UF2 file, copy it to the Pico, plug it all in, and you can play Doom on a $4 microcontroller. It's awesome.
So, viewer asks, will Pis be as widespread as BBC micros in school? What do you think, Neil?
That Doom demo was great, by the way. It ran at a decent frame rate too, which was nice. In schools, well, I don't have any kids, so I don't know. My finger's not on the pulse as to what's going on in schools with computer literacy at the moment. They should be. They should be as big as the BBC Micro was, but I don't know if they are, I'm afraid.
They are popular in schools. I mean, I've worked with schools around the UK doing Raspberry Pi stuff before I started with Tom's Hardware. And there's a lot of teachers and a lot of children out there who are getting hands-on with Raspberry Pi. And the simple reason is it's cheap. And as Pete Lomaster said, who's been on the show, so the co-founder of the Raspberry Pi Foundation, it's getting cheap hardware into their hands. They're not afraid to break it. If they break it, they can go and get another one. It's just, $20. Probably not at the minute, because it's really hard to get them. But in an ideal world, the kids can just pick up this machine, do wonderful stuff, and away they go. You haven't got to worry. And as Kean's saying in the chat now, there's lots of schools doing stuff. There's code clubs. There's Raspberry Pi community, Raspberry Jams. Kids love Pi. And, they're going to be the developers of the future.
We have had inquiries from teachers about possibly using the space here in the cave now we're open, and Coding Club has been mentioned. So, the Pi would be the ideal candidate, especially for a space where I want to be able to get things out and then quickly put them all away again. Perfect. The days of wheeling the BBC Micro out on the school trolley are long gone.
Yeah, we had that in my school. We had the BBC Micro on a trolley in the science lab, and we had a nuclear reactor simulator.
Nice.
Needless to say, it melted down a few times.
Yeah, there's no question that kids need to have a computer to mess with, right? And we, there's shortage right now, but I don't know what's going on right here in my neighborhood here in New York. My son is in 4th grade, and they just have computers that they use for learning in the school. They haven't done a ton with coding. I mainly do that with him at home, but maybe when he gets to be in an older grade, they'll do it more, or we'll just start a club. But kids, you gotta have a computer in 2022, which is why I'll just throw in a small pitch here for anybody who might be watching or listening. Back over here in the States, we Tom's Hardware, we support a charity called Including You. And Including You takes donations of old PCs, laptops especially, Chromebooks, and gives them to kids who don't have a computer, primarily in the New York area, so that they can use them for learning. So anyway, we were just cleaning out the lab this week back in the home office. Isn't just our lab, by the way. We share it with a bunch of other publications, so it wasn't all our stuff, but there was a bunch of old laptops in there that we were able to give away to Including You, and that's great because you just can't get by today with just going to the computer lab. You have to have a computer. So speaking of things you have to have, Ash, you have a special case for your Raspberry Pi.
I do. If you notice the poster behind me, you'll notice it's a PlayStation 1. And you might be wondering how you can cram a Raspberry Pi into one of those. And the answer is Retro Flag's PlayStation case. Now, this little guy is a nice housing, beautiful housing, I might say, for your Raspberry Pi 4. There are 2 editions, one that comes with the screen and one that does not come with the screen. I opted for this one for 2 reasons. One, it's just cool to have the PlayStation 1 with the screen. 2, it has a really useful HDMI out. And I want to go over a little bit of some of what it features, but I've got the bottom removed here. Inside, you'll see I've got a Raspberry Pi 4. It is made just for the Raspberry Pi 4. So that means you're probably going to have a hard time getting a hold of one right now. If you've got one lying around, it might be, in your interest to pick up one of these cases. But in addition to housing a Pi, it's got a few buttons, including a power button, which of course safe shutdown is really useful, reset, which I'm pretty sure you could program to do anything that you wanted to, and it's got an open button, which is pretty flippin' awesome because it quite literally flips this open, and it has micro SD card storage. So if you wanted to have a RetroPie set up, or you wanted to have one with Laka, or whatever operating system you want, you could just have your cards right there, swap it out, boot right up. And now I also wanted to point out an option that you have for video output. I pointed out this HDMI port on the back. The regular Raspberry Pi 4 doesn't have your standard size HDMI. It has is it called mini or micro? It's got the 2 little
Micro.
HDMIs. Yeah. So with this, you get that HDMI, and I have my favorite adapter here that lets you connect HDMI to RCA. So if you want to get that really good authentic experience, something that Neil I'm sure is familiar with, you want to hook it up to a CRT. Find the old hardware. It's not exactly a PlayStation 1, but it's pretty close.
That's a nice case. Really nice. And it does look like the PS1, like the re-release came out a few years after the original PS1. Especially with that screen. That screen was quite sought after as well in retro community for a while.
It's pretty slick. It looks pretty good too when it boots up. And you've got 2 USB ports on the front. I would probably go for a wireless controller, but you could probably get a USB adapter and use actual PlayStation controllers, something like that.
Yeah.
Might have to fiddle with it to get it to work, but
Yeah. No question.
That lid as well. That lid is just an SD card launcher, really, isn't it? Come on.
Oh, it's awesome. You've got little slots that you can lose things in, but there's like a little tray. So you don't really want to go tossing it around while they're full of SD
I've got the
cards.
SNES version of it, and it's the same thing. You press eject, and your SD card has just gone somewhere.
That's brilliant.
Has somebody created an SD card holder that looks like a floppy disk?
I have seen a project like that in the past where, you can actually put it in the disk drive and it docks the SD card with the reader inside the computer. I've not seen one commercially available, but I've seen a project. Yeah,
That would be pretty cool. So you do that, and then you make sure that it loads super slowly, so you can emulate what it's like waiting for your Apple II game to load. Like every time I hear all these things about now, people are having like NVMe SSDs to load your game, and you're going to have like continuous game loading. And then I think about what it was like to play Castle Wolfenstein on an Apple II. So, have any of you played the original Castle Wolfenstein, not the 3D?
Maybe a long time ago.
You had to sit through like, I don't know, like 10 screens of like story where it would have a whole written story for you about how to play the game while you waited for it to load, and that could easily be like 5 minutes.
Oh no, Les, 5 minutes, Les. You're talking to a couple of guys who grew up with cassette tape games.
Yeah,
no sympathy
I know.
from us.
I know. I mean,
have a day out on our bikes, enjoying the sunshine, come back and the game and just fail to load.
Yeah. Well, the worst, right, when you had typed it in from Compute Magazine or whatever, or I don't know if you had that in the UK, but when we had to actually type in the whole program yourself and then save it, and if you had a typo.
Yeah, I didn't realize as a kid when you type in all these wonderful things from magazines that you could save them. I didn't realize you could record to the tape. It was only, and this is quite embarrassing, it was only 2 years ago I found that you could save to tape.
Well, it's never too late to get those cassettes. So I want to thank Neil so much for joining us. It's such an honor and such a pleasure. I have to come to UK just so I can see the cave. But everyone can see what you're doing if they go to rmcretro.com, where not only can you book an appointment to see the cave, you can watch the videos, and there's a store where you can get some cool gear. So really awesome. Thank you so much, Neil. Thank you so much to everyone for listening and viewing. We are here every Tuesday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, and starting again next week, 7:30 p.m. UK time. So we will see you all then. Bye, everyone.